A good pleasure of mine to introduce our first presenter, Dr. Chris Impey from the University of Arizona. Chris's research is on observational cosmology, gravitational lensing, and the evolution and structure of galaxies. Dr. Impey has over 160 referred scientific publications and has published 2 books, The Living Cosmos and How It Ends. And he has several forthcoming books, including How It Began. In addition, Chris is working on a book on his experiences teaching monastic science, and we're looking forward to this publication. Dr. Impey has also taught at 3 workshops for the Science for Monks Sager Science Leadership Institute. He's one of our favorite teachers, both among the staff and the monastics. And please give a warm welcome to our first presenter, Dr. Impey.
Thank you very much, Bryce. It's a great pleasure to be here at this conference, and of course, a great honor that the conference was opened by His Holiness. In short, he is what would be called the ultimate hard act to follow, but I will do my cosmology thing. I think, although I have no evidence yet, that the universe contains comedy and tragedy. I think the universe contains suffering and compassion. And I think it contains these things on worlds other than our own. That is a conjecture. Science is on the verge of discovering life elsewhere, and that is the story I want to tell today. The fact that biology exists in the universe is remarkable because life is in the middle of 42 orders of magnitude range of scale, from the subatomic nucleus to the largest structure of galaxies. What's remarkable is, of course, that entities like us at the middle of that range of scales can hold both within our heads. The unity of the cosmos is symbolized by the Ouroboros, an ancient symbol in cultures across the world, the snake that eats its tail. His Holiness has said that both science and the teachings of the Buddha tell us of the fundamental unity of all things. And that is amply borne out by science in the 21st century, and especially my field, cosmology. The universe is a complex place, and it is remarkable that we can understand it at all. I use grains of sand both literally and as metaphors, because each grain of sand under a microscope is a tiny geological world, and yet in our study of the universe, we have to contemplate billions of these worlds. The complexity we see around us seems like magic, but it is not. It is the result of natural forces acting over cosmic time. The complex is actually simple, but the simple can be complex too. To describe something as simple as a pile of sand where you add grains to the top requires chaos theory and complex mathematics. One of the features of our complex universe is that the parts are not always simply describable in terms of the whole. Emergence is the idea that the whole is more than the sum of its parts, that humans, for example, are just the chemicals we're made of. Here's an example. If you have a glass of water, it is obviously wet, it is transparent, it will dissolve things, and it is polar in its chemical properties. But a single water molecule cannot be wet and cannot be transparent. At what point does water become water? A brain can think, can be self-aware, can know death, and can create. But the components of which it's made can do none of these things. At what point does a brain become a brain? And I submit that two other aspects that I'm talking about are in this same category. The idea of life itself, at what point does something become living? And perhaps the idea of the universe itself. At what point does something become what we call a universe? To talk about something that has not yet been discovered, which is life beyond Earth, we have to use our imaginations, as we do in all forms of science. And scientists and artists and others have been doing this for hundreds of years. In the case of Newton, on the left, imagining orbits and space travel 3 centuries before it was possible with technology. And even though we have no close-up views of other worlds in space, space artists have been visualizing this for a century. In thinking about biology in other locations, we have to think outside the box. We have to go beyond Darwin. And we don't know what that looks like. Imagine that the universe is composed of things that are and things that are not. Things that happen and things that don't happen. And our job is just to find out which is which as scientists. The interesting point, both in physics and other forms of science, is that there are things that are possible, which do not break any law of nature, which don't actually happen. It's a larger set. We don't know the boundaries of that set. The bigger problem, but I'd rather call it an opportunity, is the imagination. It is not machines doing this work, not robots or automata. It's people. And our imaginations are bigger than the worlds we imagine. And so we might imagine things in the universe that are, but probably we cannot imagine all the things that actually exist. We can imagine things that are possible and do happen, and things that are possible but don't. And we can imagine things that are impossible, and there's nothing wrong with that. How do we know the boundaries between these different sets? Let's start with the basic ingredients. The simple answer is that the universe was made for life. This graph shows the abundance of all the elements in the periodic table. It's a logarithmic scale, so by far the most abundant elements are upwards and to the left, hydrogen and helium. There at the beginning. Notice that the next most abundant elements, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, are just those elements that a biologist or a chemist would say are essential for life. They're quite abundant, 1 part in a few thousand. These elements are forged in stars and ejected into space by the death of those same stars. And in fact, the story of stars is our story, because we're made of stardust. For almost 13 billion years, stars have been living and dying, and their stories are intertwined with our stories because they've made the elements from which we are made. And in the sense that there has been more carbon, more nitrogen, more oxygen made over cosmic time, the universe has been getting more hospitable for life as time goes by. But let's start first with biology and the simple things we can say. I think we lost the sound at the end of that. So with biology, we have one example to study, and we're wondering about hypothetical biologies. Look at this and tell me if you think it's alive. It emerges from almost nothing, like life on Earth. It appears purposeful and directed, complex, unpredictable. But it is not alive. It is, in fact, the action of flour and water and a baking sheet on top of a bass drum. So things can look complicated and not be alive. Things can look simple and be alive. Biologists do not agree on the definition of life, and so as an astronomer, I feel quite comfortable in my ignorance. We can say life has order. It organizes the chaos of the surrounding environment. Life uses energy. Sometimes it uses the direct and manifest energy of the sun. Other times it lives further down the chain of life, using other forms of life's energy. Life is interconnected in a profound way, in a hierarchy extending from the entire ecosystem of the Earth to individual organisms, down to the subparts of cells and the molecules that provide their function. It's been known for a long time that a simple reductionist strategy in understanding biological systems fails, because their behaviors are emergent and can't be understood in terms of their components. What do we need to have life? Most scientists would agree that water is special. We need water. It's not a strong requirement. It's the third most abundant molecule in the universe. So not only are carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen abundant, but water, the medium in which life began and which life still depends, is available everywhere. Carbon is special and is the second most abundant element made in stars. And with carbon as a basis for chemistry, the possibilities are essentially infinite. So biology has a toolkit with as many tools as it wants. Did it have to make life that looks like us, that works this way? Absolutely not. There are other possibilities, if we're imaginative enough to think of them. And the universe may indeed have made some of these other possibilities. It's hard to think when you stare or consider the difference between an elephant and a fungus and a butterfly, that these are profoundly the same thing, examples of the same thing. All life on Earth is literally one thing. The traditional tree of life was very comforting for our insecurities because it places us at the top of the tree, the natural, perhaps inevitable result of evolution and natural selection over billions of years. In this view, we seem special, and it comforts us. The truth is a little less comforting. The modern tree of life is based on mapping DNA or RNA, the genetic material itself, and showing how it evolved over those same 4 billion years with gradual deviations. This is a powerful method because it doesn't depend on saying that something looks like something else. You cannot use the species method with bacteria, for example, and most life on Earth is bacterial. The modern tree of life looks like this, and to you it will look very strange. Most of these trees, the branches on the tree, are unfamiliar. Off in the top right, you see plants and animals. But these are small parts of the tree of life in terms of the real estate of genetic information. I can't actually show how small it is, but all of the apes, primates, including us, are smaller than the dot of the eye in animals. So we are the tiniest little twig on the tree of life, a tree that's almost overwhelmingly composed of microscopic organisms. That's good for our sense of humbleness, I think. We're all brothers in a very deep sense. If you think of marriage within a family, you might think the family you married into, and maybe the children born, are half yours and half the other family. Our overlap with other species is much more profound than that. We share half or more of our DNA with yeast and wheat. Yeast and wheat are our brothers too. Life on Earth is incredible in its degree of diversity based on small percentages of the genetic material. This unity, of course, is very familiar in the Buddhist tradition, where the connectedness of all living things is the foundation idea, but it's the foundation idea of modern biology as well. To go beyond this, I could also say that if any two of you in the room, say any two of the Tibetans in the room, you have more variation between your two sets of DNA than one of you and an African tribesman or an Inuit fisherman or someone who lives in Paris. The genetic variation between two people, unrelated, living in the same village, is 5 or 6 times more than any two people plucked from the planet. And we make such a fuss of the tiny little genetic diversity that does exist between individuals. Life on Earth has found its way into places far more inhospitable than are familiar to us. Some of you may find this room a little cold, but that is because we are frail and weak. Life on Earth can be in places where it rains once in a century. Don't feel bad about being cold, but life elsewhere can exist below the freezing point of water. It does this because it invented antifreeze, so the cells don't break. Life on Earth exists in the deep darkness and superheated water of volcanic vents under the ocean, independent of the sun. So if you've heard someone say life needs a star, that's not true. Life just needs energy of some form. Life can exist with the radiation equivalent to standing 100 meters from an atomic bomb exploding, and does quite well with that. It does this by repairing its genetic material hundreds or thousands of times faster than we do. Life can be found in the equivalent of battery acid or drain cleaning fluid. Life can be found 10, 20, 30 miles underground in complete darkness, living off the tepid glow of radioactive material in the rock itself. This is the range of life on one planet, our planet. What might be the range of life on other planets that we've only just discovered? We don't know. Microbes maybe don't seem interesting enough to spend too much time talking about. So while remembering that we live on a microbial world, it is their world, not ours, and when we have gone, they will be quite happy to take it over again. And indeed, there are more microbes in your gut, more cells in those microbes than individual cells in the human body. We represent the end of an outcome of 4 billion years of evolution, with branching points and random influences. It will be very hard to predict us, especially the last part of the story that led us to develop from the apes, from small animals that we might not even recognize as very intelligent. Is this a fluke? How likely or unlikely are we? And has anything like us evolved on other planets? The thing that we think might mark us out from other creatures is our intelligence. But even there, it pays to have a little humility or curiosity, perhaps, about other modes of intelligence. This is a relationship between the mass of the body and the mass of a brain. Very simplistic view of intelligence, of course. But in these terms, not only do we not have the largest brains on Earth, but we're not as special in this diagram. We're near the upper edge, but nothing special. There are social insects whose behaviors are quite complex, whose engineering works rival ours in some senses. The point not whether an ant or a termite is intelligent, but that evolution doesn't stand still. There are many more species of insects than there are primates or animals, and evolution will take them in directions that we can only just imagine. What will be the result of the cooperative behaviors they indicate and after more years of evolution? Or what would social insects have done or figured out how to do on other worlds? The only thing you need to know about this bird, a crow, is that it has never been in this situation before. Birds indeed use twigs to poke for insects in the holes in trees in the wild, but this bird was presented with a tasty treat, meat at the bottom of a cylinder, and just a single piece of straight wire as a tool. And in the first attempt, did this. Discovered that it had a lever, invented a hook, so yes, we're smarter than birds, obviously. What about this creature? This creature exists in a three-dimensional maze that gets experienced human divers confused. This creature has 9 brains, 1 at the center of its body and 8 at the periphery. This creature's skin is a video display device with 1 billion pixels. This creature has very complex behavior, and it has some quite clever tricks. We'll watch that in reverse. This creature, a cephalopod, diverged from our lineage in the Tree of Life 300 million years ago. This is the alien among us that lives on Earth, with whom we cannot communicate, We have no idea if this creature has feelings, does suffer pain, that's known from lab experiments. We don't know the nature of its intelligence or its mind. So while we go off to look for life in the universe, we should remember what we share the planet with. Here's another example. Humans are not actually capable of this particular trick, which involves bringing bubbles under the water and turning them into toys. We're a very egocentric species. For better or worse, this is our planet. We are the masters, no question. But we don't know a lot about the creatures we share it with. And when we talk about intelligence and sentience and suffering and pain and emotional states, there's an enormous amount we don't know. As an astronomer, I would speculate, perhaps in 50 years we find a planet, to find out there's life on that planet. Maybe there's some amazing creature on that planet, just a little bit like an elephant. You know, if we found such a thing, it would be the most amazing discovery. We'd think it was wonderful. We'd do everything we could to understand, study, and preserve these strange creatures far away. But we already have the elephants. We already have the dolphins. They're right here. And who knows what goes on inside their heads. For another type of extraterrestrial perspective, let me just point out how recent our supremacy is. On the left, you see the surge in brain size of humans, mostly in the last few 100,000 years. On the right, you see a graph that shows the brains of dolphins and toothed whales over 40 or 50 million years of Earth history. And this is in terms of body mass, a brain to body mass ratio. So being further to the right here is being smarter, and time moves upwards. The red and green lines show the average ratio of brain to body of the whales and dolphins. And the black line shows us, or our ancestors. And what you'll see is that if aliens had come to the Earth for most of the last 50 million years and wondered where the brainy creatures were, they'd have gone into the oceans. Just in the last million years have we eclipsed the marine mammals. Indeed, our time on top may be short. We don't know. It's a transient place in the history of the Earth. Exobiology is the search or the study for life beyond Earth. If we were to find life elsewhere, it would be a revolution equal to the Copernican revolution, which showed we were not the center of the universe. Since the time of Copernicus, we found that we are one star among many, in one galaxy among many. We're not even made of the stuff that the universe is made of, primarily dark matter and dark energy. The discovery of other life forms would be yet another level of displacement of our centrality in the scheme of things. But I don't think it would be a surprise, and I don't think it would be unwelcome. In this subject, we are still in a high state of ignorance. Most of the microbial world is not understood, and I've already told you how amazing some of their capabilities are. We have just poked around the solar system a few places, early days. These are expensive and difficult missions. We've just begun to find habitable worlds beyond the solar system. It's a brand new field of research. And in terms of searching for intelligent signals from aliens elsewhere, the search has barely begun. So we tend to make assumptions, because in science, sometimes you have to make assumptions to progress. But if all we look for is life situated on planets, using carbon chemistry, with DNA or something like it as a replicating molecule, then we may have missed most that's out there. I've already mentioned that life does not need a star. It's not obvious it needs a planet. It might not need carbon. And last, in that outer sphere, it might be unrecognizable to us. We've just begun to look outside. This is our home. Carl Sagan used this image to call our planet the pale blue dot, seen here against the ring of Saturn. We want to know how special it is. There are places not far from home that are interesting for biology. This is the icy surface of Europa, one of Galileo's moons of Jupiter. This moon has a kilometer-thick icy crust covering tens of kilometers deep water. The entire moon is a water world. We have designs that could land a probe on the ice pack, melt through it, and search for life. Not funded, but it would be an interesting thing to do. This world looks Earth-like. On the lower right, you see clouds, a shoreline, a river delta. This is Titan, a large moon of Saturn. Titan has an atmosphere made of the stuff we breathe, nitrogen, and twice as thick. But because it's a frigid world, where the chemistry is based on ethane and methane, if there is life here, it will be unlike anything on Earth. The closest target for astronomers is, of course, Mars. And Mars has disappointed us because for 35 years, we thought it to be an arid desert with a thin atmosphere, flooded with ultraviolet rays and cosmic rays that would seem to sterilize the surface. But we've had tantalizing evidence that Mars is a water world underneath. This pair of pictures shows a subsurface aquifer erupting and spilling water down a hillside. The water evaporates into space. But we have evidence that Mars can be wet from time to time. And now, so many missions are planned for Mars that Mars is actually going to get a little crowded. Astronomers have finally started to find distant worlds, the first only 15 years ago. For centuries, we wondered if there were planets around other stars. Now we know there are. Here's one of the early systems to see what we've started to find. Imagine a familiar part of the sky, constellation of Cancer. And one of the brightest stars in this constellation, some 20 light years away. We can't visit it with spacecraft, but we can with our telescopes. Going through the solar system, across the light years, we found a system of 4 planets, mostly large, like Uranus and Neptune. But this is a solar system, very far from home. The first, it turns out, of many. How have astronomers done this? A clever trick. The planet is invisible. Earth, as seen from afar, would be 1 billion times fainter than the sun. Jupiter, 100 million times fainter. We cannot see the planet by reflected light. Instead, we see the planet by the wobble it exerts on its parent star by the force of gravity. So we look for the wobbling star and infer the planet. If the orbit is like this, we have an additional possibility, which is to observe the slight dimming of the star as the planet crosses its face. Both of these effects have now been observed hundreds of times, and that's how we know there are planets around other stars. We also know, in this case from theory, that these are going to be water worlds, many of them. Some will be baked dry, like Mercury. Some will be frigid worlds, as in the outer solar system. But a substantial number of Earth-like worlds should exist according to theory and computer simulation. Here's the state of this exciting field just 15 years after it started. Each red dot is a planet system. In many cases, multiple planets have been found. The line shows you how the detection has improved from Jupiter things early on towards, just in the last few years, Earth-like things. So we're approaching the detectability of Earth-like planets just in the last few years. And NASA's Kepler satellite is going to fill in that space. Finding an Earth-like planet is exciting, but how would we know if it's alive? It is, after all, likely to be tens of light years away, maybe hundreds. This is how we'll find out. We'll take that feeble light, that reflected light from the planet and spread it into a spectrum, and look for the indicator of life indirectly. Here you see the spectra of Mars in red, and Venus in yellow, and the Earth in blue. They all show carbon dioxide, but Earth alone shows very strong signature of oxygen, ozone, and water. The oxygen is a tracer of life on this planet. If the biosphere shut overnight, if every living creature on Earth died tonight, the 20% of oxygen in the atmosphere would disappear in less than 1 million years. A blink of an eye, geologically. It is sustained only by the biosphere. Reversing that, we want to look for oxygen and ozone and other gases as indirect tracers of life. We are close to finding Earths. They won't exactly be like our Earth. They'll be subtly and interestingly different. And I have to break one piece of bad news to you. Finding another Earth will not relieve us of our obligation to look after this one, because the next nearest Earth is likely to be tens, maybe 100 light years away. No way to go there, no way to get us there if we mess up the planet. We could, however, potentially communicate. And so let me get to the last part of my talk, the frontier of the subject. Microbes are interesting, but there's a sense of companionship we're looking for here. We want to know if we're alone or not, and what that means. Here's a perspective on the number of worlds in the universe we think might host life, based on current research. The number of grains of sand you might hold in your hand is the number of stars that have been inspected for planets. The number where we have enough information to show they might be habitable in terms of our form of biology is maybe less than 100, the number of grains of sand that would stick to your finger. Projecting into the Milky Way, the number of habitable worlds is the number of grains of sand in the sandbox. Each one potentially hosting biology. Each one potentially hosting sentient creatures with hopes, dreams, fears, longings, unknown to us. And these grains of sand are representatives of just our galaxy. In the universe, there are 100 billion galaxies. Off into the distance in this picture, you see an arc of beach. The number of habitable worlds in the universe is the number of grains of sand on this beach. How significant is our life then, if even a modest fraction of these worlds are alive? Here's the number: 1 billion habitable worlds. It's not just space, it's time. Life on Earth started about 4 billion years ago. But the universe had 8 billion years before Earth even formed to be doing biological experiments. In other words, there could be creatures that got to our stage of evolution and then went on a few billion more years. What would that be like? We don't know. I don't even think it's possible to visualize that many habitable worlds. But just take the ones in the Milky Way. If I made a little travelogue where we looked at each planet, and many will be dead, for 5 seconds or so, you'll see here 1 minute of that travelogue, a dozen potentially living worlds. You have to imagine this continuing for 10,000 years before you had inspected just the habitable worlds in one galaxy. In advance of finding life anywhere else, and without knowing whether that life might be intelligent, astronomers are trying to communicate. They're sending messages into space. These attempts at communication might seem feeble. They're more symbolic than anything else. This plaque or picture is attached to the leg of the Pioneer 10 spacecraft, the first man-made object to leave the solar system. It's our message in a bottle, 12 billion miles from Earth now. But even as fast as its feet can carry it, and beyond the edge of the solar system, it will be 100,000 years before it approaches another star. We've even sent a record into space with 110 of the world's languages represented, with our music, with images of us. It represents us, but again, it may not be a realistic attempt at communication, especially when the aliens are likely to have unknown function and unknown form. Other attempts involve radio telescopes, efficient ways to send information across the light years. Those experiments have improved dramatically because of Moore's law, the advances in electronics. And to the people who conduct these experiments and have heard nothing, they are listening rather than sending, they are not discouraged, because the capability is improving so rapidly. To put a number on that, the experiments are done with lasers as well as radio telescopes. If there were a civilization on any of the nearest 100 million stars with lasers or radio telescope technology, we are sensitive enough to detect them. So what are the forms of alien life? I have no idea. I don't think they've been represented in science fiction. I'm pretty sure they're not represented in TVs and movies that I've seen. I think they may be stranger than we can imagine. It's motivated, however, to look for such creatures and to wonder what we might learn by them. The physicist Enrico Fermi posed a very interesting question 60 years ago, recognizing that our technology is young and that we are unlikely, if we're not the only, to be the first intelligent civilization in the universe. He asked, where are they? Going further, a very modest extrapolation of our technology will let us travel beyond Earth, either physically or with our robotic eyes and ears. In fact, to travel through the galaxy. He also knew, even then, how many likely sites for life there would be. The question, where are they, is well posed. And one answer to it is indeed that we are alone, truly alone, which would be an amazing outcome in a universe this vast and this full of biological potential. We might hope to learn from such species if we find them. Do they share our fears and dreams? Are there civilizations that have compassion but no suffering? What happens out there in the multitudes of the planets? We still need to get over ourselves a little more, remembering that the aliens may be to us as we are to bacteria. They may not be interested, or they may think of us in a slightly different way, one less comfortable. Going there is not yet on the cards. Our space program is in its infant stages. Having been part of the graduation and teaching of the first cohort of monks in the leadership program, I know who I would choose as our next cohort of astronauts, remembering that space is tricky. Things can go wrong when you're an astronaut. See, that's the mistake when you let NASA run the game. I think I know who we should send next.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on. Ground control to Major Tom. 8, 7, 6. Commencing countdown, engines on. 3, 2. Check ignition and may God's love be with you.
Walking on the
I think we will get there eventually. If we look at the history of transportation, we might project that in a century or so, we will be traveling to the stars. And whether it's with robots or ourselves, we will find out the answer. If there is companionship there, we will find out. It may take a while. But again, if anyone got to this stage before us, they could, in a very short time, just a few million years, travel the galaxy. These would be the ancients of the galaxy, the wise ones who've been there, who've been everywhere. And so, in the end, having answered a few questions, mostly, as in all good science, more questions are raised than are answered. In a universe with 10,000 billion stars, an enormous number of habitable spots, and therefore very likely, given the raw ingredients, a myriad of life forms, we do seem special in some ways and should treasure that. But we're not special in any cosmic sense. And so astronomy, of course, is not yet able to answer the question that underlies all these considerations. Why are we here?